Hello, everyone. This is the third episode of Glamorous Toolkit Live. Today, we're going to talk about example-driven development. And for this session as well, I'll be joined by Andrei.
Hello.
We will try to pair a little bit to both introduce the concept of examples and to see how we're actually playing with them. So, Andrei, where do we start?
We should start by looking at examples.
By example. We show examples by examples. Okay, so we start from some of the examples that already exist. There's lots of them already in the image. And one of them is in Addressbook, the example, this one. So this is now an example class. And it has here a number of methods, a number of example methods. And let's quickly check to see the comment. So we can see here that the comment is a live document and it shows us a couple of things. So this is an address book, that's the model. And then here we see, okay, we have an address, in an address book, we have contacts and they can have several properties like name, address, description apparently here. So here I see a method called Jane Doe contact. This is annotated with GT example. And it gives me an example of what happens here. So I can see here, okay, I have a contact variable, and which is an instance of GTAB contact. I have a first name, I have a last name, a description, an avatar, apparently, an address, a phone, notes. And then here I have a lot of assertions. And at the end, I return a contact. So this is interesting. I actually want to play with that. So here at the bottom, I have multiple actions. And one of those actions is play and inspect the example result, which means that I would like to execute the example and then look at the inspect the result. So if I run it, I can see basically that I have here an inspector embedded right underneath. And this is an instance of a contact, Jane Doe. And it has details here. I see a business card and maybe the notes here, preview. So. Okay, so I have this. So what I would suggest, I think it would be good to start by trying to do something similar. Just to basically take this one contact, and see what we can do with that. What do you think, Andrei?
Yes, let's create an object.
So
we have to switch to the playground.
Should we go to the playground? Okay, let's switch to the playground. So I press right, the way I open the playground is I press Shift Enter to open Spotter, which is the global search. And then by typing playground, the first search is, first search category is the tools. And now I can see here playground and I press Enter and I go into a playground, right? So now I can go back and forth. Let's say, let me take
maybe just the okay.
We'll take and then we'll see. So I just paste it over here. The code. Okay, so we create a contact. Let's call it Billie Jean.
Good name.
And okay, the description doesn't matter at the moment. Okay, what's this GDAB contact avatar? I can see that the method exists, and if I run it, oh, okay, that's that one. Great. And so now we can close that. Okay, it has an address. Well, this is interesting because this address here, maybe it's, how is this called? How is this implemented?
It's another object.
So if I am expanding this, right, I'm in a document in the comment of the class, and I saw a method over here, and now I can expand that method and I can see how it is. Okay, so I can see this is it's another object. So I go back here. So instead of this, I'll do that. And okay, where do we say? It's in New York, USA. And then we also have a phone. So what's about the phone? How is the phone implemented? I can see here. So here there's a phone. Oh, a phone is also an object. Okay, great. So let's do one of these. So I have a phone. The prefix should be
maybe just one.
Just one, and then some number, something like 555. All numbers in US start with 555. I don't know why. And so okay, this one and that one, I think. I don't know. Looks good. So now if we now, I have here basically, I learned from that example how I can instantiate an object. So let's quickly check. Indeed, I evaluate this and I get the post. I get a business card here, Billie Jean, the number and the address. And that's great. But now, when we're working with examples, it's not just that we're playing with instantiating object, but we also would like to. So if I put here an instance like a local variable, what we can do now, we could do something like, well, we want to assert that, what should we assert here?
Let's assert the full name, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So because so let's see if we get a good understanding of what's going on there. So I would expect that the full name is called Billie Jean.
But that's
first it's without a quote. Should be like equal. Let's see if I understand correctly. So if I do this, it looks like, oh, great, it passed that one. So let's introduce an error here. So that would have been an exception.
But that would be in a new window, so I guess it doesn't.
Yeah, that would be in a new window that didn't appear here, right? But yeah, so we have this one. So we've played with this one in a playground. So we just basically, from an example, one of the usages is you see how an object is being instantiated, which is pretty much what you can also learn from a test to some extent. So if we look at the anatomy of an example, what we're seeing here is that we are setting up something, and we are triggering some behavior, and then we are asserting whether the result is what we expect. And so up to here, an example looks exactly like a test. This looks exactly like, say, just a setup, some triggering, some assertion, and at the end, yeah, you get an assertion. But the difference is that here we have a return. This is the main difference, technically, between a test and an example. Now, why do we have this? So to exemplify this one, let's take this little snippet, and we go into this address book. And what I will do here is I will let's see, search for. I see here multiple categories. So maybe the contacts. See here a couple of, so Jane Doe was here as this was the contact that we looked at in the comment. So what I will do now is I'll create a new, I will create a new method here, and we can call it Billie Jean
contact
in New York. Contact. And then here, okay, we don't have that. We add a temporary variable. And yeah, so afterwards, what we want is we want to simply return this contact. So if I now save it, this is just a normal method. But if I want to transform it into an example, I have to annotate it. So here I'm going to use a pragma. Notice how as soon as I started to add the pragma, a set of methods appear here at the bottom, because what happened here is that coder sensed that there's a new context. So we know more about this method, and this is not just a plain method, it's an example method. And as a consequence, it offers us a few extra actions here. So one action is like the one I showed before is this plain inspect. So what the result of it is that this example over here now executed. So now we can see that the status is green. And because it's green, I can also see the result right here, or I can get it onto the right. And similarly, if I'm here, I can also just run it. And if you run it, then it's green. So let's make it red, for example. If I run it now, this is now yellow, which means that there is some sort of an exception. Over there, I could go and click on it and debug it, or let's fix it back. If I run it again, now it's green. And so, yeah, that's what happened here. This is the magic of these actions here. Basically, we have all the actions now to play with this example in place, as if we are basically in the playground. And this is where it becomes interesting. It's interesting because when we play and inspect an example, not only do we run it, so basically do what a test does, but we are basically creating a new conversation here. Because this inspector here now shows us the inside of that object, and with this inside, we can now play more. We can explore more, and the examples can actually play. They constitute the beginning of the next conversation that we're having. So, we're not normally when we stop testing in normal classic unit testing frameworks, what happens there is that basically we're getting the test to first, maybe it's yellow, then we make it green, but then we stop. With examples, that's when we actually start, because we can continue the conversation. Okay, so let's do that. We were playing recently in this Addressbook model with the functionality of merge, right, Andre?
Yeah, but then maybe we should create an address book, or we add it to an existing one.
Let's create, exactly, because like this merge makes a lot of sense in an address book. So let's create here. Let's create a new address book.
Yeah, sounds good.
So address book for merging. So I'll make it an example. And here we'll say, I want an address book. Well, address book.
Yeah, second.
Address book, and make it a temporary from there. And then we're going to say address book. I think it is add contact.
Yes, add contact.
Contact, right. And so this is now interesting. Where do we get the contact from? And well, we just created one over here. And given that this is now in this moment, in this specific case, we are in the same class, which means this means that we can just simply do self and then Billie Jean in New York contact, right? And then we can also assert here that the address book, I don't know, maybe that it has actually, that it has something inside. And in this case also, it's very useful to return that address book. So once we save it, the buttons appear. And if we run it, and we get this, so that means that the assertion is okay, the example is green, and we get the result. So we have here contacts with details, and we have Billie Jean there. So what we want to do next is, right, what do we want to do next? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we should add another contact. Maybe that's similar. So maybe we could have another contact, but same Billie Jean. Maybe we have a contact for Billie Jean that has a different phone number.
In Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Even, okay, maybe the same phone number and a different address.
Different address? Or maybe we change both.
Or should be the same. Let's change both.
We change both. So, okay, now this doesn't exist, so I'm going to create it. And I'm going to do very similar as I've done here. So, in this case. So, I'm going to say again, Billie Jean, same avatar at the moment. And I'm going to say here, Los Angeles, still US, and still some number. I don't know the numbers there, but we're still going to keep the magic 555. And put some 3 over here. Great. So we just saved this one. a new one, and let's make this one an example as well, make sure it gets tested. So, okay, so we just created a new method over here, and if I run it, oh, this is yellow because the size here is 2. I run it, now it's green, so I can execute that one. Ooh, I can see that that I have 2 times Billie Jean, and I have these 2 phone numbers over there. Okay, so what do we do next?
Ideally, we'd like to
right,
merge.
we should test the merging, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so here we say at contact merge.
Or it's different one, or is it add or merge contact?
Yeah, I think this one. Add or merge contact, that sounds good. And we'll do this. And now, of course, contacts should be 1. Let's see. We're correct. Contacts should be 1. Right. I think we left it.
Test a bit more that actually it merges correctly the contact.
Exactly, because this is where we left it last time. And now we should go and test a little bit more to see what's inside. So we know now that this address book, so that we can take any one of those.
Or should be just one, so first or any one.
Yeah. So the merged, or let's call it the merged contact. We should do something like this, and we can add it as a temporary. Okay, and so now we have this merged contact. And what should we know about this? Because we know now that, for example, it should have, the full name should still be Billie Jean.
Yes, it's the same name.
Right, and this one basically should be pretty much the same assertion there. So you say merged contact, right? And if I run this one, it's green, great. What else do we know? Well, let's quickly check the 2 setups. So you can see that's the same name, same avatar at this moment. Okay, so we can see I have here 1 address and here's another address. And I have here 1 phone and here another phone. So we wanted it, if I remember correctly, we wanted it to be, we should be able to have multiple addresses, and the meaning of the merge would mean that we would have 2 addresses, right?
So 2 addresses and 2 phone numbers.
Yeah, okay, so let's do this. So we have to assert now that the merged contact would have, well, let's say the addresses are, or let's say telephone, is it?
Telephones, I guess.
Telephones. So if I do that, it's green, great. And now I should do the same for addresses. And if I do addresses here, it should be still true. And if I run this, oops, this is yellow. Why is that? This is interesting. So now we need to go and investigate a little bit here.
Yeah, we can maybe look at the object first to see what's in the...
Yeah, we could. In fact, what I will do here is I run it, I get a debugger. Now I will quickly share the new debugger window, like this, everybody can see it. Okay, so now we have a debugger over here. And of course now it's failing, so we have to go all the way until we have merged the contacts. Tuck. Okay, now we have a merged contact over here. We can just inspect that one. And notice how, because we're in the debugger now, when I pressed Command G to inspect, and I inspected this, this merge contact, and I can see it on the right. So, okay, I can see here apparently that these 2 numbers appear, but there's only 1 address. It's a bit, If I look at here at the raw, I can see that there's a preview for nodes. You see notes is a collection, but I don't have previews for phones and addresses. I'm not comfortable looking at this, so I'd like to create those views first. Okay, so how do we do that? We say we want to say for addresses. So we're going to create a GT view, and here we just put a list.
A list would be fine. At least we want to see them and then dive into them.
Right. So then we have here self addresses. Okay, so this is not good because I only have one.
Yes.
And
just New York, so maybe it was. But we can also add a view maybe for phone numbers. Or...
yeah, let's do the same for telephones. The same.
Let's see what we get here.
Let's see. I have new phones. Okay, great. So I can see that those exist. So if I click on that, I get the phone object over there, and this is the phone, and this is the address book. And if I click on this one, I get one address. So which address is this? Let's quickly check here. It's the first one. So it's the address from the one in which I merged. So probably didn't take it from there.
Okay, so now we need to find out where that happens.
Right, so we could do it from here. We could restart the debugger here, maybe.
Yeah, why not?
And we go right in there. So we are now in the add or merge. And dun, dun, dun. Okay, here I can see.
Method that does the merge.
Right, okay, I can see it here. So all contacts, if I now look at that, I see I have only one of them.
And it asks if it can merge, and if it can merge, it merges.
Right, and then the contact over here is Billie Jean's. So let's see.
The step through now should be.
So we should. So it's there, and now we see one contact is this one. So New York, USA, and the other contact is this Los Angeles contact. Now notice here how, right, if I would just look at the print, it would be rather difficult to distinguish between which of these is which, basically. But because I have this nice preview, I can see it. It's much easier to do the diff. Okay, so what next? I basically go through, and here I need to go inside. So what does it say here? It says, okay, I have an assertion that it can merge. Okay.
And then it means in the logic.
Okay, oh, right, we are now in a one single contact.
So it merges one contact into another contact, it seems.
Yeah.
And from what I see, we merge notes and telephones, but we have no merging addresses.
Okay, that's a good note. Okay, let's see. So basically, if I do the same for the address book, something like this.
Yeah, maybe let's name that an address also.
Something like that. If I accept that, what happens next?
Maybe now we can also maybe just find the context of the test, of the example.
So we could just go here and start again, maybe, for example.
Yeah, both also works.
Let's see if this is correct. Tuck, tuck, tuck. So everything is great. Tuck, tuck.
Maybe I can inspect the object now to see what's there.
Ah, you mean the merge contact? Look at that, it's over here. Great. So now if I look at addresses, then I have the correct thing. Pretty cool. Okay, so this means that if I now go back to my editor, so my non-debugger environment, I can rerun this one and now it's green. So my assertions is green, I'm happy, and I can commit now. Excellent. So this is what did we see here? Let's see, let's do a summary. So we saw that essentially with examples, we follow the same path as we do with tests. So we can do, for example, example-driven development with explorations. But the difference between examples and the tests is that with examples, we return an object. So that means every single example not only asserts that the behavior is as expected, but also provides some output for further exploration. And when combined with, so here, if we're combining this one with the view, and with these custom views, then we can use this. We have a much more interesting dialogue with our objects, and that those views, we noticed that they can be either interesting for learning, but it can also be interesting for debugging. So much quicker diffing, for example. And then the other thing to notice here is that once our objects return an object, what happens next is that we can combine examples. In this case, the address book example relies on the first contact and on the second contact. Now, the interesting part here is that these contacts here, right, they basically act like a setup. So for the address book for merging example, the Billie Jean in New York and Billie Jean in Los Angeles are like setup. On the other hand, each of those examples are examples in their own right, and we can test or check things in that context too. So that's interesting too, because a simple change also did away with maybe an unnecessary concept like the setup, because there's no difference now between an example and a setup, which also means that we can have assertions, for example, in setup. So, and of course now, once we look at this example over here, we can see that it has two dependencies. So if I now, there's one action here which says inspect the example object. So in this case, we are not inspecting the result of the example, but the actual object behind these examples. So what do I mean by that? So if I inspect this one, I get an editor just for this example outside of anything else. But we also can look at it like this. So we can see, okay, this is my example, and this is the previous example. So these are the contact examples. So we can see how this one is actually composed. And equally, I can also explore the same thing, maybe visually. So let's explore this one a little bit, expand this a bit. So here I can see address book, add contact self Billie Jean in New York. And if I expand that, I can see it now. I don't see it expanded in place at this moment. I see it on the right. And I can also see, okay, there's another one over here. And it's interesting here, I can navigate, and this is a live view, or I can maybe expand it. And I can do the same for both of these. So, and the other thing that I can do here is, because these are examples and because they're executable, because we've just learned, and because they return an object, I can simply view it in an inspector. I can do that for this one, I can do this for that. And so the interesting part here is that because I can see now, and I have this Billie Jean in New York, and there's Billie Jean in Los Angeles, and now the result should be that I should have an address book with just one Billie Jean So, and I can see how these basically combine. And in this case, I just changed the way I'm looking at it. So this is the interesting part of that we can combine the views, not only for the actual code that we're creating, but also for how we're actually manipulating the code that we are creating. Good. So, and this is what happens when these dependencies are explicit. So what happens here is that not only do we reuse code, right? So these two contact, the setup, but the dependencies are now very much explicit. And because they're explicit, we can actually see, we can reason about them from, like, we can get the overview of how they are composed. And the same thing happens here. So if we look at all the examples in this class over here, there are more of them. We can look here at the example map. And so up to now, we played with 2 examples. This is what we ran in our context. But we see that here there's how these examples are basically put together. They're much more dependencies that we didn't necessarily look at right now, but they still exist. And here we can see that we just played with 2 examples, but in total there are 29. So we can run them all and see how they work. So and the interesting thing here is that if I click on one of these, let's put an exception here. So I'll make this one 48. And if I run this one again, then all of a sudden, this is, it should have been, I don't know why. And so now it's green again. And these dependencies, so if I now go back here, there's yet another address book. So we've actually played with this merge algorithm before, and we just, for the sake of the tutorial here, introduce an error. But in this case, we already have more of these merging examples. And if we look at these example map, what happens here is that some of these, some of the examples from the Addressbook contact merge example are using other examples from the AB Addressbook example. And what we see here is, so the reuse of examples is not limited to just one class, because we can simply instantiate another class and simply call that method. And the engine understands that there is a dependency there. So if we look at one of these, we simply see here that we have a main contact, second contact, and the way we're creating the contact is by instantiating this other class. And from this, the example engine understands how the overall, how all dependencies work. The other part that is interesting to note about examples is that once we have examples, so we have gone through the normal, let's say, example-driven development or test-driven development flow, at the end, because we have these objects that are being returned by our examples, we can also weave them together with the views into interesting documentation. So here, this is where we started from. We started from just an introduction into what an address book is, that it is made out of contact. So we can see this is how you set up a contact. It's a normal thing that every time you encounter a library, you want to understand, how do I instantiate them? So this is something that it's very easy to now put together. And we can see, we can either execute this, or we can pre-execute it like this over there, or we can have a full address book. And yeah, just simply play with that. And then of course, this one, from here, we can go and engage with the objects anytime, and we can see it on the right. Now, so Examples are useful for testing purposes, but they are also useful for exploration purposes, and they are useful for documentation purposes. Interestingly, the same effort can be repurposed for all of these different perspectives. And then we can use these the same mechanism. You can use them in all sorts of different situations. In fact, all Glamorous Toolkit is we don't have tests, we only have examples throughout the whole environment. So one of these is to document how something works. So for example, here, I think we had a case, an algorithm where we talked about it last time, and this was the
no.
I think it was the tree map verify, like this one. And so here, right, if I go into the comments of this is actually an algorithm. It's a part of, so once you have a tree map, which is a layout or a visualization, the squarifying algorithm tries to make it as square as possible. So, and what we see here is we have a document which is made out of basically examples describing us how the overall picture is being produced at every single step. Now, essentially, this is not something that is automatically created. So if we look at every single one of these, we can see here that there's an annotation that embeds an example. And so we can go and browse that example like this. And we can, of course, test it and run it, and we can see it, right? We can go and play with that directly. But what's also interesting is that because we wanted to tell this story, this is not a trivial algorithm, even though it's well published. It still requires us to go and understand the details. And very often, like for example, when you really, like with this algorithm, writing the assertions is not obvious. And you have to kind of discover how the assertion, what the assertion should be, what is the correct logic of the algorithm before you're actually implementing in our case, we implement it in our infrastructure. So in order for us to be able to reason about the algorithm itself, notice how the object that is being returned, for example, here, it's called the GT graph tree map squarify step. And that's the interesting thing. It's interesting because we split, instead of just having methods and just calls, because it's an algorithm, we have explicit objects that model every phase in this algorithm. And when we are combining that object with the visualization, then we can build a story like this, because they are all of these are just steps, and they just know how to draw themselves. And this is how then we can combine. We can build the story about it. And that's a way to use it, which is, if we think about it, is just, okay, we have examples, and then we can create documentation, but what kind of documentation also is a very useful thing to consider, because there are many ways in which we can use the same concept, the same mechanics. We can use them for different kinds of purposes. So before, for the address book was, it's kind of like, this is how you start with it. In this case, this is essentially it's an engineering tool that describes how this algorithm was actually put together. Sometimes we also use it for tutorial purposes. So let's say there was just a conversation on Discord today about something called the analyst sector. So if you go to that one, that's a geometry, which basically creates shapes like this. And then if we look at the
example should be it's referenced in the comment at the end.
Oh, there it is, exactly. Right here, we can see this is just one of them. And then here we're seeing a more elaborate picture. And basically here it says, well, that these are all the different possibilities of scripting or of parameterizing this animal sector so that we can produce all of these different kind of shapes. So we can take, at any point, we can take a look at these here. This is what happens when you're doing that. We can say that by default, that's the instantiation, the default one. And then if you just want to do something else, you can say the start angle, the end angle, and so on. And the same for each of them, right? So this is now becomes a tutorial, right? Or a more complicated kind of a tutorial, maybe we can find it in the Mondrian basic examples, for example, for our visualization engine, or so one of them, the one that is concerned with graphs, right? So this is more of a little bit of a more elaborate, including a tutorial of how you compose things. So here we're creating some nodes, some edges, and then we lay them out. Maybe we're changing the edges and so on. So that's a summary of, or a short introduction into what examples are. I'd say, did I miss anything, Andre?
No, I think we covered all that we wanted to.
Great. So then we can switch to the questions and answers, if there are any, of course. Other questions?
Hi there.
Hello.
I think in one of the examples you were showing us, you were about to show us how when a test example breaks, a whole bunch of examples break. But by looking at the dependencies, you can see which one is at fault. So instead of having to examine all these tests, there's only one that you really have to look at.
Right. Indeed. So here, let's go back to the example that we just wrote. Which one was that? This was the address book for merging. So, and let's just add an, let's just make this one fail. So now, if we run all examples, then we should get one of them or two of them are failures. And so the question is which two? So if I now look at the map of dependencies, of course, because this one has failed, also the other one that depending on it has failed too. But only, where should I look? Should I look at both of them? Well, not really, because of course, if this one fails, which means I shouldn't look at it. I should only look at this one. And this is often an actual problem in testing. When you have just a few causes or lots of failures, the question is, where do you look first, right? And if you have explicit dependencies between examples, then this can also guide that type of an exploration. Does that answer the question, Oscar?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great. Are there other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I've seen that in some cases you prepare these examples based on certain files where the steps are stored or something like that, no? The difference in code. I think are very related to this, isn't it? The OMBU files or something like that.
No, those are, go ahead, Andre.
No, I think that's the Epicea files. No? Epicea only.
Right. Those are completely different. It's a different concept, but we'll touch on that.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Those are so what you're referring to are the mechanism that we are using for expressing tutorials about code that does not yet exist. Which means, so if we go, or where's a good example of that? Okay, here, examples by example. Here we are having, this is an description is a document describing examples on some other case. And in this case, this code, so the class GT examples tutorial and the class or this method create file in memory, this method does not yet exist. So here we're creating a change and then we are embedding into a document so that you can then play with it and work with that the tutorial. But these are distinct from the concept of examples. It just so happens that this specific tutorial here is teaching you how to use examples.
Thank
Does
you.
this address the question?
Yes.
Right.
Eventually, I think it will be nice to have a session talking about this, how to create them and how to manipulate these kind of files, I think.
Definitely. All of this is coming. Just stay tuned for the next live sessions.
I'll do.
Are there other questions?
Hi, I think I have a question.
You think you have a question?
Yep, Cedric. I think you talked about unit tests and does exemplifying, is it intended to replace test or is it complementary? I'm not sure I understood that point.
This is a typical question that we are having, that we get. Indeed, in our case, we do not rely on any unit test. All our tests, all our assertions are captured by the means of an example. This is simply a different, it's a different medium. It's a different way to express tests, basically. You can look at it like that. It's just that it has all these other properties that tests do not have. And the only difference, or the only structural difference, is really this one, that an example returns an object. That's it. So you can think of them, you can approach them exactly like tests. Basically, there's no learning curve, but instead of naming them tests or subclassing some testing framework superclass, we are annotating with GD examples. Any method in the environment can be a GD example. You're free to add assertions there and return an object. If you don't return an object, it's fine too. So there's no drawback in using examples versus tests, but you do have the benefits that you don't have to choose before you know what you're going to use this specific example for. You don't have to choose the medium in which you're expressing that, in which you're expressing the examples, because a test really is that. Let me think about this. What is a test? Well, we set up a beautiful object. We ensure that that beautiful object has beautiful properties. And then a test thinks that the best possible thing we can do with this beautiful object that has a beautiful property that we care about is to throw it away. That sounds like a very not environmentally friendly approach, right? So in our case, we're not throwing it away. We're giving it to you so that you can do something with it, because now you know that you have an object with very interesting properties that you actually care about. So that's it. So it's just a different way of, you can look at it or you can approach it, start with it. It's simply a different way of expressing tests, and then gradually learn how you can exploit the same effort for in these other ways. Does this address the question?
Yes, perfect. I was wondering if there are any limits or limitation, but you answered too. So
there are no. We have covered all the behavior that exists in typical unit testing frameworks. We covered those for all those semantics are covered in the examples engine.
okay, thanks.
Other questions? This must have been a very clear presentation. Great. Well, in that case, oh, there are a few questions. Oh, it was a great, oh, very useful. It was clear. This is what the chat says. Excellent. So on this note, then we can simply adjourn, and it's going to be earlier than usual, but we're going to continue next week. And the specific date and time will be announced during the week. Thank you very much, and see you next time.